Welcome. This is the second of the bigger meetings that Big Bath and North East Somerset Independent Group have held. The object of this evening is, one, to get you involved with us, which is my bit later on. But first, we're lucky to have Peter Macfadyen, who's been a friend of mine for years and years and years, and he'll introduce himself, won't you? The only thing we have in common, of course, is we both have red shoes. So Peter's going to talk for about half an hour and take questions at the end. Then I'm going to talk for about 10-15 minutes, point out some people in the room who are going to talk for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to take lots and lots of questions, and hopefully you'll go away realising that local politics is no place for party politics, and that by joining with us at Bath and North East Somerset Independent Group, we'll actually be creating a much better, a much more inclusive and exciting, that's the thing, exciting next 4 years? 4 years, 5 years. So, Peter Macfadyen, all the way from Frome, on his, no, not on his bike. Sorry, I just want to say one more thing. Peter will talk about a book called Flat Pack Democracy, which I published. And I have some in my bag, and I'm sure for a £5 you can purchase a copy, and for half a pint of beer, Peter will sign it.
I've got to get home.
Oh, right. You stay at my house.
Which is partly how Peter and I know each other. We had supper just now, and I remember actually we met about 25 years ago. When I finished being employed, I thought this is the last moment I'll ever have enough money to buy some decent books. So I went to Peter's house and bought a box full of books. That's when we first met. And then about 8 years ago, Peter persuaded me to write. Well, he said, "I'm really excited about what's happened in Frome's politics. You should, it should be a book." And I thought, well, I've written things before. This won't take long, And 6 months later, when we're on version 9, and I'm going, "I give up. I don't want any more to do with this," and he's kind of saying, "No, keep going. We'll get there." Anyway, that became Flat Pack Democracy, which is a DIY guide to taking power at a local level. Which we sold lots of, to our complete and utter astonishment. Well, certainly mine. Thousands and thousands of them. And in fact, I've just spent yesterday with a Danish mayor, because there's a lot of Danish flat packery going on. And it was a Danish person who introduced me to the word flat packery, which is really galling. That if you can use someone else's language that well, to take a word like flat pack and turn it into flat packery, when it's only a book title. Anyway. I think I have my whole half hour now, haven't I? Anyway, I won't talk for half an hour, I hope. What Peter has asked me to do is to briefly give you the story of Frome's recent politics. And then I want to just draw your attention, in a sense, or draw out a couple of the things that I think make not so much the politics, but the whole way, the ethos of what we're doing interesting, and hopefully interesting in relation to Bath. And I'm not going to keep saying Bath and Baines and whatever else you are. But I mean, when I say Bath, I mean the big thing, which is obviously different, and what you need to do is different. But hopefully, what you'll get from me is some things which might cross that boundary. So I came to this from by accident. I came to Frome because I worked for a charity called Action on Disability and Development, and all my working life has been in social justice, much of it in Africa, with groups of disabled people, primarily, and then more latterly on climate change. So I've been much involved in overseas in half my life, and then in Frome the other half, in things like the Frome's Transition Town movement. Has Bath got a Transition Town movement?
Yes, it has.
Oh, yes, I knew that. Because you run it, don't you?
Yes.
I went to the council with my Transition Town hat on. This is about 8 years ago now, in about the end of 2009, and said, "Can you tell me about your environmental policy?" And they said, "We've got a park." And I said, "Yeah. I know. Actually, I want to know about climate change and peak oil and all of that kind of thing." And the answer was, "Actually, Peter, we've got a park. That's it. Please stop annoying us." And I was bemoaning this fact in the pub later with a bunch of people, and realised that there were basically a whole load of things that the then town council was really not doing. It wasn't, massively, well, it wasn't corrupt, it was just hugely unambitious. Like most parish councils, parish and town being the same level in councils, they did twinning, and they did lots of the mayor dressing up and spending people's money eating things, and not a lot else in many ways. They ran the park and did what they needed to. But amongst this group of us in the pub was a guy called Melasha, who, where are you? One of you knows, don't you? Yeah, you know, you've met, yeah. Who had worked, he'd run South Somerset County Council, District Council. And so he knew this from the other side, he knew a lot of things from the other side. So one of the things he knew was that there was legislation about to happen. At that point, David Cameron had just said, we're going to take the power from the political elite and give it to the man and woman in the street. It didn't go so well, actually, but he was still, at that point, that's what he was saying. And we thought, great, if there's going to be all this power cascading down to a local level, we'll have it. And that was part of what sort of inspired this group of us to think, well, actually, why don't we just stir things up and see if we can get Frome's Town Council to be more ambitious, to take advantage of localism, and actually get stuff done here. And so what we thought, one of the other things that Mel and some others said to us is that if you try and do this outside of party politics, the history of independents working together is not great. And I remember asking him, so, do you know examples of how independents have worked together? And there was a sort of one of those moments of sort of, wow. And he could think of about half a dozen which were a complete disaster, and none where it had worked. And that led us to these, this concept of ways of working, which some of you will have discussed or know about, which are essentially a set of core values. So that what we tried to do is to say, this is how we will work together as a group. If elected, this is how we will behave together. Because what tends to happen with independents is they're quite extreme. They're often people who've been thrown out of their parties, so they're way off, they're too extreme for UKIP or whatever. And so the chance of them working together is zero. Or they've come together for one specific thing, so they're the anti-Tesco group. Or, so they come together on one theme. And then once elected, and maybe having got rid of Tesco or whatever it is they want to do, they then realise that they all hate each other. Or they've got nothing in common. And they haven't spent any time working on... So what happens when you disagree? How are you going to handle that so you don't immediately fragment? So we put quite a lot of time into thinking that through. And developed this idea that we could work together with these ways of working. And that if we did that, we wouldn't need to have a manifesto. But we wouldn't need to be saying what we will do in terms of policy. We would just need to be saying how we're going to do it. And then the other thing we said to the good people of Frome was we will massively up the participation. So we'll move to participatory democracy from representative democracy, which I'll come back to in a bit. But essentially, the way that things tend to work is that you get elected, and then disappear for 4 years, and then lo and behold, your councillors all turn up in lots of photos a few weeks before the next election, having not heard of them in that intervening period. And what we were saying is we will do things differently, where we will be constantly engaging with you during the time when we're elected. So that led us to elections. So we kind of got that together. Oh no, wait a minute, I better have some candidates, hadn't I? We went to another pub and ended up with 17 candidates for 17 seats, almost instantly, really. That was not difficult at all. Because you've got a whole pool, if you haven't got a party to choose from, which is limited by its tiny number, you can have the whole of Frome to choose people from, as long as they're adult. So we had a much wider pool of people. So it was not a problem at all finding 17 people. So that was in about February, March, before a May election. And then we ran a very upbeat and positive campaign. One of the other things we said is that we wouldn't enter into a negativity at all. We wouldn't answer letters. Whatever letters and accusations, and it was only the beginning of Facebook, really, 8 years ago. Hard to believe. But, we wouldn't really engage with that whole world, and we didn't. So we ran that incredibly positively and won 10 out of the 17 seats in that May, with about a 75% increase in turnout as well. So, it hugely increased the interest in politics. And then, right from the beginning, we did what we said we'd do, which was rip up the rules. And again, I don't know if it would be the same at your level, but we had something which was called the standing orders, which are literally a big fat book of the rules, and some of them are in dark print, and they're set by central government, which is fair enough. That's the sort of auditing of the money and some things which obviously one should be doing. But the vast majority of it is by choice. So all of those things where if you came to a council meeting originally, there would have been a row of councillors. If you wanted to speak, you'd stand there, with your shaking bit of paper, having booked in to do your bit. And then the councillors could completely ignore what you say. All of that is just the way that people tend to do it, and it is in the standing orders. It's really a recommendation as to how to run your council. You don't have to do it like that. So at that very first meeting, what normally happens is you elect the mayor, and then you elect people to committees, which is completely bonkers, because nobody knows what those committees are, and what their remit is, and what they might do, and nobody knows who the other councillors are and who would be best suited. So from that, we elected a mayor to chair the meeting, and then we said, right, that's enough of that now. Let's now cease this meeting. We abandoned the meeting at that point, or we had a motion to do so, and there was chaos and mayhem. So, as you might imagine, the other remaining councillors actually literally burst into tears and said anarchy was now going to destroy Frome. But what the answer was, we're not going to kill anyone. At this level, at our level, you're not doing health and roads and schools, and 2 weeks to work out what we wanted to do was absolutely fine, which is what we did. And then introduced things which are way, way more informal. So our council meetings now look like this. And dotted around in the room will be councillors who have a bit of orange paper, and when we need to vote, you can stick your hand in the air. But we can have small table discussions, and you can have things in much, much more informal, which is how we run our meetings. And in all sorts of other ways, things are done in ways that sort of let people in. And I think partly because of that, Frome's attracted some really, really good staff. Some from other councils, and some people who would never work for other councils. There's one Peter and I are both directors of Frome's Renewable Energy Co-op, which puts solar power on, like the Bath Renewable, what is it?
Bath and West.
Bath and West. Same thing. They helped us get set up to put solar panels on them, on roofs. And there's a woman called Anna Francis who works for the council, who's another of those directors. She came to Frome and really wants to save the planet, and looked around at how to, where she could best place herself, and joined the council. And she's really, really good. And there's a collection of other people who've come to the council and enabled us to do things to really up the game as a council. I think partly because of the relationship that councillors have with staff, which is very, very equal in lots of ways. So I'm not going to tell you lots of the things that we did in that first period, particularly, because it'll take too long. But the key ones were borrowing significant amounts of money and spending significant amounts of money, not putting the taxes up massively, but supporting a vast range of projects. So essentially upping the game. I said that before, haven't I? But it was sort of trying to change an attitude so that yes became the default answer, not no. And so that when people came to the council, or indeed came to Frome, they would feel that it was a place where whatever your idea was, you could, there was some way of making that happen. And the borrowing was important because actually town councils, and I imagine all other councils, can borrow large amounts of money on very low rates of interest over very long periods of time. So if any of you have been to Frome and seen the Cheese and Grain, great big building in the middle of the town, that was pretty run down, and we borrowed £500,000 as a town council, which costs us less to pay off than the subsidy was. If that makes sense. We were putting 30 grand a year in as a subsidy, we're now paying off 25 grand a year. Having spent that money, the whole building gets massively revamped. It can now attract much bigger bands, it can work much better as a big village hall, that kind of thing. So, as I say, I'm not going to particularly dwell on any more of the story, except to say that in 2015 we stood again. Well, that's when the next election was. There were about 35 people who wanted to become IF councillors, and we had a bit of a task working out how to we set up a group and a set of criteria to make that decision about who could stand. To my complete astonishment, all the parties stood against us, because I thought, in my naivety, that they would go, why don't we concentrate on the district and the county level and let Frome, it's working, we all live there, it's not a very big place, let's not do that. But actually, everyone, including UKIP, which is quite surprising at the parish council level, stood all over the place. And Independents for Frome won 17 out of 17 seats in that election, which is obviously much harder to do, because then you've got to have a certain amount of record. The first time, you're basically saying, we're going to be better than them. The second time, you actually have to have done something. So I feel much prouder, really, of that achievement. So, I'm just going to turn on my clock, wasn't I? How am I doing?
Splendid. You've got, look at them, they're all silent.
Yeah, no, fine.
Listening
attentively. I was going to, so hopefully I'm about halfway through. That's meant to be kind of a rapid run through Frome's story. I can give you more of it, obviously, and the book has, you don't really need it, but the detail of how we ran those, the campaign and so on. But there's a couple of things about what we're doing now, and I think what we've tried to do since the beginning, that I think, and I may be wrong, but hopefully you will feel could apply equally here and are equally important. So, the two areas that I think we've really changed things are around the one I've touched on already, which is participation. That we've massively increased that. And at the heart of that is a belief that representative democracy actually doesn't really work. That in many ways I think the parties are over. And that what's happening is, despite things like a big increase in Labour Party membership, the number of people voting is consistently falling. And after every election, you get this, oh gosh, that was terrible, and then everyone goes back to normal. Because actually it suits, when I say everyone, it suits the main parties to keep things like that. So there's a, democracy, which doesn't function, in my view, hardly at all. The number of people engaged is just dropping off consistently. At the same time, as most of us know more, there are, I know if you read Facebook, you know what somebody's meant to, there are ways to find out what's going on in a way that there never was before. So it made sense to have participative. I really can't say that word, I'm going to have to change it. Participative. No, it made sense to have representative democracy, kind of, when all these things were invented, and Lord someone or other set off from Bath on his horse and went to Westminster. Because how could he possibly have known what was going on here? So it kind of, it was a kind of way to do things. But it doesn't make sense anymore, because it's perfectly possible to have a constant dialogue with whoever you're voting for. So what we've tried to do is, as I said, have all of the meetings way, way more open. And we often get this kind of number of people to meetings. Whereas most parish councils have tales of, somebody coming and them going, oh, never had one of them before. It's kind of like, you don't get people going to parish councils, but we have lots. The other thing we've done is a whole set of what we're now calling people's budgeting, more commonly called participatory budgeting, where you're going back out with chunks of the budget to the people, and the people make the decision. So last weekend, there were 150 people in the football club who made the decision about where grant money is going to go to for events in Frome next year. And one of the things we realised was by taking it outside of the council, now technically those are recommendations from the people, but what we've said is we will do whatever you recommend. But because it's technically a recommendation, we could say anyone over 10 can vote, which is great. So suddenly you can allow a lot of those events, particularly, are ones that will, have greater impact on younger people. So suddenly you can bring that in a way which we couldn't do otherwise. So the People's Budgeting has done, for the last 2 years, has done the big chunks of grants. And the grant money, when we first came in, we increased it tenfold. So about 35–40% of our budget now goes back out to groups. Not sort of randomly, because at the same time we employ 2 staff and contract in someone to help with fundraising. So what we've tried to do is to build a stronger, much more fundable voluntary sector in Frome. And there's about 400 groups in Frome now. And for any of you who read, George Monbiot had an article in The Guardian a few weeks ago, and there's been quite a lot of press around the well-being in Frome, because our levels of hospital readmission are way lower than the rest of Somerset. And that's built on having a really thriving and vibrant voluntary sector. And that's not accidental. So over the last 8 years, we've put a lot of money and a lot of time into that, because our feeling was that, our recognition was that money is not going to come down from the district and from the county any longer, or for much longer. So we haven't had money for the arts, for mental health, for youth, for years now, and we probably never will again. So unless we can do it, none of those things will be addressed. So the way we felt we could do that was to hugely strengthen the voluntary sector. We've done some one-off decisions too in the community. So there was an issue around whether to close some toilets or not. This is the sort of thing that parish councils do. But over 1,000 people got involved and voted in that decision. And the thing I wanted to say about that is, for us, or certainly for me, it's the process that's more important than the decision in some ways. I mean, we as a council probably would have made the same decision. But what we're trying to do is to re-engineer or re-inspire a greater degree of political literacy, so that people are more used to making decisions that matter. And again, we said, whatever the decision is, we'll go with it. Now, in fact, I mean, at the risk of undermining myself, all three decisions were fine. We'd learnt from Brexit. So whatever the people had decided would work. But actually, yeah, I mean, it's more about getting people engaged than anything. And then the final one I wanted to mention is panels. There were some areas of strategy which we realised we as councillors, we didn't know much about. The best example, or earliest, was sport, when none of us were particularly into sport, but we were well aware that Frome had all sorts of issues around sports provision. So what we did was created these panels which were very well run. Basically, we said to people, come to 3 meetings, 2 hours each, one in the football club, one in the rugby club, one in the cricket club. The first one will kind of look at what's going on in Frome, the next one will have a discussion about where it might go, and then the third one will create the strategy. Tell us what you want us to do, kind of thing. And well facilitated, a bit like this again, tables of people around. When we tried to do that 7 years previously, we got sort of about that many of the most vocal, sporty people. The other one, what we've done with panels, had 70, 80, you can't get in. It may have been the bar. But, by going to people's own spaces, it works so much better. And then we've done that with 5 other things now. And again, we've adopted that strategy, or those strategies. The most pleasing thing for me is that people haven't abused that at all. And one's already, I think, seeing that greater literacy, if you see what I mean. So, the sports strategy didn't say, right, we want a ski slope and it was kind of like, there was a bit at the beginning where we said these are the kinds of things we might be able to do, but people seem to, absolutely understood that, and then there's been some really lovely things that have come out of that. So, that participation, I think, has been hugely important in the way that we've done things, and really changed Frome in all sorts of other ways that they're definitely not attributable to the council, but one can begin to see. And then the second thing I wanted to say, that's the other example really, is about building different sorts of relationships. And again, it's about trust, really. One of the things we did early on is said, just because I got elected doesn't mean I know anything about anything. So if there's a subject, we take a subject at a time at the beginning of a council meeting. And the first one we took was around the impact of austerity. And we asked people who were involved in the churches and welfare, and anyone who might know about what's really going on in relation to poverty in Frome to come. And they did, and they came, and the thing which shocked us most was the number of people sleeping on the streets of Frome, which at the time was 6 or 7, which I know compared to Bath is tiny. But for us, for those of you who've been to Frome, it's like, blimey, there are 6 or 7 people sleeping on the streets of Frome. This was in October too. And then that led fairly quickly to us saying, right, so can we work with you and pick out some key people I'll cut this short, but it ended up with Frome, separate organisation that's now a charity. Well, yeah, that's a charity that has its own trustees, and yeah, they are trustees, has about 40 really key volunteers, and they run the food bank, and then they now distribute white goods and furniture, and then the spin-off of that's included the community fridge, which again some of you may have heard of, that collects fresh goods and redistributes 4,000 items a month, and a share shop, and now something called another organisation called Fair Housing, which is looking at housing, which has just got a grant of 80,000 from a trust to employ staff. So the point about these things, and the reason I'm saying to you, is it's from our point of view, it's about trying to expand all the time. That little group of councillors who are voluntary, after all, can't possibly know very much or do very much in relation to the issues that we face. So what's absolutely key is to create a different relationship in which you're bringing in other people and giving them power. I say giving them sounds like I mean, you know, we have it to give, but I mean it's sort of like recognising their expertise and then saying, you can run this. And yeah, we do core fund Frome at the moment, but that amount of money, which is 15 grand a year, they're bringing in way more than that. So it's a way of sort of leveraging up funding. Giving power back to the people. And prior to that, well, it's the same kind of thing. The participatory budgeting and so on is also about trying to expand decision-making and get people back into thinking that if I get involved and say I want something, it'll actually make any difference. Because I think we've really lost that. And that's part of the problem with it. You know, that's why you're sat here, really, because power has been taken from you. And that's really what all this is about. And so I've only got a little bit left, which is partly about so what can you do here? Because I mean, and then I've written at the top here Bradford-on-Avon, who I wanted to mention, who again many of you will know have done exactly the same as Frome and are run by a group of independents, and are also on a really radical and interesting and different sort of pathway, I think. So I suppose the main thing I want to say about this is that I think, and I know fairly little about what you're up to or want to be up to, I would say that if you're on a course to recreate or to create a new party, that could work, and particularly Hereford have a one called Hereford First, where they are quite a narrow, well, they're a group of people who've come together and they put Hereford first, and they've got some sitting councillors at is Hereford a city? I think it is, isn't it? At a city level. So it's a sort of higher level than Frome. But it's a very traditional model. They have a leader, a deputy leader, a manifesto, and so on. So it doesn't do any of the things I'm talking about a widening politics, which personally I think is absolutely vital. But anyway, so I think that the route of becoming just an ordinary party will fail. It'll definitely fail because of the electoral system. I mean, in the sense that it's so difficult. Winchester independents went down that route and did really well in terms of the number of people who voted for them, but they didn't get any seats, of course, in a sense, because, you know, winner takes all. So it's incredibly difficult with our political system to do otherwise. You can do it in Denmark, where there is the Alternative Party has that same sort of model of us as Frome, of a set of values. They have 12 MPs, because if you get 2% of the vote, you get MPs, you know. But I mean, I suppose it doesn't help us banging our heads against brick walls. It's not going to happen here. I wouldn't have thought in my lifetime. You know, it might happen in some of yours. But so I think that the only thing to be doing is to offer something which is really radically different. And that's about saying we want to change the way that politics works, and it's about reclaiming politics. It's about it's a different paradigm in lots of ways. Because and without that, I think that, you know, we will continue to sort of fester in the gloom that you fester in. And there's something else that's really, really worrying about that for me, which is that as politics becomes less and less interesting, there's a huge gap into which populism and extremism can easily go. And so I suppose the other thing which I'd say to you is that it's almost like you have to do this. because and that's partly why I spend my time, not all my time, but you're not the only group I've talked to in different places, but because I really do think that the only way out of that is by re-empowering people at a grassroots level, and that's the way in. Because if a few men continue to run the world as we are, we will head off the edge, and that we actually sort of need to reclaim politics, and that's what Big needs to do as much as we did in Frome, and that's really what we've been trying to do in Frome. I would say not overtly. I mean, I knew that, I think, and increasingly knew it. So in a sense, it's a hidden agenda in Frome, this pushing out of politics and trying to get more people engaged. But I think it's the way that you need to go. And being a traditional party definitely wouldn't. I don't know if that's still on the cards or it's what you had in mind at all. I think that's all I want to say, actually, because that'll leave more time for questions. I was rather rushing through, so hopefully if there's anything that I made was completely unclear or too garbled, you can ask me in a bit. Thanks.